Hello and welcome to the AxeLifePodcast. I'm Vinny. Today I'm joined by Josh, who's normally the producer pushing the buttons. And the reason why I wanted to have Josh participate in today's podcast is because what we're going to be talking about today is the evolution of the throw. I think a lot of axe throwers out there have experienced what it's like to go from your first axe throwing session when you showed up at your favorite axe throwing venue on the weekend, and you're drinking some beers. You learn the throw from the axe throwing coach there. We call them experts here, and they show you, two-handed, one-handed step and throw, and then if you decide to become competitive, how does your throw change? So I want to introduce you to Josh. There's Josh. He's normally there. He's usually the guy behind the scenes pushing the buttons, the ones and twos. But Josh is also a axe throwing coach, also known as an expert here at Broad Axe Throwing, and a relatively new thrower. So he's got, the step and throws mastered. And now he is in the evolution of his competitive throw. So, we showed Josh how to do, step and throw, two-handed, one-handed, and then started introducing him to some of the other throws that exist to try to find his throw. So, Josh, I wanted to ask you, what is it like in order to go from, the standard throw that you see on everybody's Instagram videos that they post online, and then all of a sudden learn something like the Canadian flick, which is a wildly different throw. Heck, it's probably not even considered a throw. It's a flick. So what was that experience like for you?
I thought it was kind of interesting because kind of like the podcast you did a couple episodes ago with Aaron talking about the adaptive throwing. I've had my shoulder rebuilt, so doing some of the throws in certain styles is a little bit more difficult for me. So it's been nice having multiple people that can do the Canadian flick and say, well, this is how so-and-so taught me, and this is what I took that was good for me. And then I went and transitioned this to try that. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly how mine works. But in less than 2 months, I've got the one hand, the two hand down, the Canadian flick. I'm pretty good at staying in that center board up until my shoulder starts, getting a little sore. Then I start kind of drifting a little bit. But I was also able to learn a couple trick shots that was interesting to do.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of, I'll just anecdotally talk about the evolution of my particular throw. Throughout this podcast episode, what we're going to do is we're going to cut away and show some of the different types of throws, how to do them, and so that you could get a visual representation of what that throw, what throw I'm talking about. You're like, what are you talking about? Step and throw or stationary one-handed? So we'll cut into those, but kind of the story of how my throw evolved was, we were an axe throwing venue in 2017. So the burgeoning stages of indoor axe throwing in the U.S. And we were throwing est-wings at Home Depot, pine, kind of dried, kiln-dried pine, hard stuff. We'd wet them down as much as we could, and then you just whip the axe at it. And that's what the sport was until, softer woods became available, better, more profiled axes became available. And so you start off with that step and throw, which is what you're showing your customers, because that's where everybody's going to start ultimately. And so I found myself, I was good enough to be a coach to identify where people were going wrong, over rotation, under rotation, being able to dial it into the bullseye. And I was able to coach them that, but I was not competitive by any means. And then one day, and it was right before the pandemic, it was during the pandemic that I found myself in that axe throwing room because we were shut down, and I was taking out some anxiety,
A little pent-up aggression.
pent-up aggression on those axe throwing boards, just kind of trying to, I find it kind of meditative, like especially if you find yourself, in the axe throwing you're throwing by yourself and you're doing your paces. You got 5 paces, grab your axe, pacing back, line it up, throw it again.
It's almost like a mindful meditation.
It is. That's how I see it. And so I find myself in that axe throwing room, not even really paying attention that, oh, well, I'm going to have to change that board because I completely bored out that bullseye. And then I realize I'm getting good at this. So we were able to get the team reassembled after, when we were allowed to open back up, and we didn't have a ton of people coming in and paying, because the bars were still shut down and people were still scared, and they weren't willing to come out and do stuff with people. So
it was an uncertain time for sure.
It was.
Like, nobody knew what was going on.
Sure. And it's behind us. But I remember my staff and I were standing around talking, and they said something like, the best axe thrower in the at Broad Axe, and I thought they were talking about me, and when I found out that they weren't, they were talking about one of our staff members named Nathan. I was like, wait, you think Nathan's a better axe thrower than me? And they all were like, oh, yeah, of course. And I was like, let's go, step up to the line. I go, do you know what I've been doing this whole pandemic? And they were just like, no. And then and Nathan and I, put ourselves to a challenge. I think there was $20 on the line or something like that.
Enough to make it interesting.
Enough to make it interesting, and it was just hands down. I kind of beat him. All right, and that's not a flex. That's not a brag, But that was the first time that I felt butterflies because of axe throwing. Like, this is a competition. I got excited. I had that competitive feeling again, and I was like, oh man, this feels good. And so once we made the move to knock down all of our walls, and so Broad Axe throwing used to be escape rooms and axe throwing rooms. And so there was nobody going to be doing escape rooms after the pandemic. I mean, but we couldn't enact a business model where we're going to ask people to go into a confined space with people they don't know as a team. So what that meant was I had to give up an 800 square foot escape room, which is a relatively, in escape room terms, a relatively large environment. If a date night wanted to buy 2 tickets, then, we're looking at, $28 times 2 for 800 square feet for an hour. And that's just business wise, that's not going to sustain you. So we knocked down all the walls, and now we had a facility that was fit to be a world-class competitive axe throwing venue. And that's what we've been ever since 2021, the beginning of 2021. So that's kind of like how it worked. And then as a venue owner, I started being introduced to better axes, better wood, and starting our first leagues. And we have a lot of league members that started right there in 2021. They're still with us, throwing various games and whatnot. And that's what we do on Tuesday night. So I've watched axe throwers go from the way we taught them with the step and throw, and then in order to become more competitive, they've adjusted their throw. The way it happened with me, I started off as a step and throw. That was, let's call that the Nathan days,
Default,
the Nathan match, right? And then I was watching videos online, and I noticed that what you want to do is start removing variables from your throw. So your step is a variable. You're not going to step exactly the same way every single time. So let's remove the step. Okay. So now I'm at a stationary throw. All right, I've removed that step, and now I'm throwing just kind of like a step and throw, but stationary. And I started mastering that throw, and I got pretty good at it. And then I went to my first axe throwing tournament, Waddle axe throwing tournament up in Murfreesboro. And it's Lucas Johnson's place called Bullseyes and Beers.
Yeah.
I walked in there pretty confident. My warm-up throws were fantastic, and I stepped up to the line for the official throw number 1. And when I brought that axe up, it was like this. I'm looking through my hatchet head because that tournament anxiety hit me right then.
It changes everything.
Yeah. And I proudly went 0-2 in that tournament, but that gave me time to step back and take a look at, like, okay, who are the most successful throwers in this venue, and why are they so dang accurate? And they all had one thing in common, that they were using a form of the Canadian flick, but all of them kind of pinned it against their head in some way, shape, or form. And I was like, that stabilizes their throw. That's what that does, and I have to learn how to do that. And so I left Murfreesboro after that tournament. I drove straight back to Augusta in the same day. I think we stayed overnight. Say again?
I was just saying, that's a drive.
It's like 4 hours or something. I don't remember how far it was, actually. No, I don't. I think I'm lying. It's not 4 hours. It's more than 4 hours. But I drove straight back to Augusta and came to Broad Axe and was like, I
got to do this.
Yeah. It was kind of late, I think. And so I stood in front of that board and I'm like, okay, they had their hands positioned like this and it's up against their head. And damn, that hurts.
My forearm got so, because you told me, like, only practice it for 15 minutes. And
at a time, yeah.
I did not listen.
Of course not.
I was like, this feels good. It's throwing good. And I've had so we do the t-shirt challenge here where you can challenge your expert.
Yeah.
You get a chance to get a nice, I kicked axe t-shirt. And when I went up and I was throwing, I was doing okay. I was kind of holding my own. But then once I learned that flick, I'm like, oh, I have to master this because I just felt it. So then when I do the t-shirt challenge with the customers, they're like, well, what are you doing? Why aren't you throwing like we do?
Right. Yeah, because it's, I find it, and everybody's got their own throw. We've talked about that multiple times on this podcast. The Canadian flick, and I'll demonstrate it for you. It's kind of when you take your axe and you rest it, you grip it a certain way where it's kind of like being plated on your hand like this, and then you pin the axe up against your head and then draw back, and most of your power is coming from the flick within your wrist and the top muscle. I feel it in the top muscle of my forearm. And when I started practicing that, because I think I spent about an hour that first night when I got back from that tournament. The next day, the pad on my hand right here was bruised.
Yep.
I had gone through total muscle failure and maybe strained the muscle on the top of my. Muscles. You don't use it. I didn't
realize how much I did not use that specific muscle group.
Yeah. So and then inside of my wrist, I felt like I was becoming arthritic, and I'm like, I'm a young man. Don't do this to me. But that's why when I showed it to other people, I'm like, look, until you build up that muscle group and start getting some toughness and some of these key, contact points with the axe on your hand.
Plus a little dexterity in the fingers.
Yeah, it requires a lot of. It does require dexterity in the fingers.
For the longest time, I had to use two hands to egg it in there.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. Yeah, I never had the problem about the like finger spread or how much I wanted to do. Everybody's is going to be different, but I was able to kind of pick that part up okay. Mm-hmm. But it was the building up the muscle groups that I needed in order to pull that off. Yeah. So the Canadian flick is my preferred throw because, in my opinion, it removes hitting the mic. It removes the most variables. If anybody's 2020's world champion, his name is Ryan Smith. Most of the people watching the podcast know who Ryan Smith is because he's probably terrifying to throw against. I've never had the pleasure. Ryan Smith in his 2020 season, he is very robotic in his throw. He's a machine. he does it the same every single time. From which foot he steps off with in order to retrieve his axe. He retrieves the axe with the same hand. He has almost a ritualistic retrieval process where he wipes the axe twice, then swings it around like some sort of old guard military rifle movement and gets himself back into position, and he brings it up, throw, the arm comes out, and it's the same every single time. I was so impressed by this. I found out he wrote a book, and it's called The Perfect Throw. I'm like, that's what I want. So
I might have to read that one.
Yeah,
because you told me about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you could take from that book. And Ryan, if you happen to listen or watch this podcast, free plug for your book. I know it's still on Amazon, so there you go. It's a worthwhile read because he takes into consideration all the variables. The book is basically about removing variables from your throw. Mm-hmm. Your throws could be different from other people's throws, but how many variables can you remove? He goes into everything from the shoes that you wear to the material of your shirt, and sticking points, the importance of ghost throwing. If you're not in an opportunity at a tournament where you're able to get all the practice throws that you want, then the importance of getting the lactic acid built up in your arm by, picking a spot on the wall and, using the weight and momentum of your axe without kind of dry firing, if you will. And getting those variables built up before your throw. And some of the things that he revealed within this book is one of his, we also talk a lot on this podcast about short-term and long-term goals. One of his short-term goals was to have a perfect league night, which is everybody strives to throw for a 64. Well, the next logical step for Ryan was, I want to go into a league night and throw 4 64s that night. And he did. He did.
No pressure.
Yeah. But so it's like, okay, this is the man you want to listen to, because he's the one that turned me on to the idea of variable removal. Now, I wear whatever t-shirt. I actually did find that shoes are important when it comes to stance stability. That was going to be a hard thing to say, stance stability. So, and I used to wear Converse All-Stars almost exclusively,
Now, not so much.
I don't, for two reasons. One is an axe throwing reason, although they're super flat and predictable. You can use that as understanding your variables.
But I'm thinking not a lot of toe coverage just in case something drops.
There's nothing. I'm never gonna drop the axe on my toe, but I don't know. Like the shoes I have on right now, I mean, they're made of they're Brooks running shoes. They're made of paper or something. So I'll take that rubber tip over this, I guess. But it was really about, like, my arch wasn't supported, so my foot wasn't completely flat, and the way that a running shoe kind of balls out towards the front, I found I get more lateral stability in the shoe. The book brought me to taking a look at all the things about my throw.
A little bit of that shoe box.
Yeah.
Or the toe box.
The toe box, yeah. So I included a lot of the things that he talked about in his book and applied them to my throw. His reasoning behind retrieving the axe with your left hand instead of your right is just save your arm. Like,
it's a good idea. Like, I still haven't quite implemented that one. Like, it's just out of habit. Like, I always do everything right-handed. So
yeah.
Just kind of force myself.
I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to be the game changer that you think in order to, but, if you tell your arm, hey, you're only doing one thing right now, and, so let this arm do the rest of it, then fine. But there were a lot of really great tips and tricks in that book that I apply for both mental focus, And he talks about, of course, your diet plays a role. Alcohol
Hydration.
consumption, things like that. What's gonna even caffeine consumption? Some people get the jitters when they drink caffeine or other supplements.
Like I will say, I do agree because I don't remember if you had told me about the like ghost throws or dry fire throws
Mm-hmm.
before I started implementing it with customers, because
Mm-hmm.
there were a few customers that they were raised right. They don't throw sharp objects in the house,
Okay.
so it's one of those like, all right, you're kind of just lobbing it out. You're not consistent in your release. Like, just try to pull it back and just go through the motion and just build that muscle memory of like, this is what I'm doing for this action.
Right.
And after they do 2 or 3 of those, and then they start throwing, they all start sticking. It seems to be a good
Yeah,
time
and
for
you
that.
said the words muscle memory, and that's pretty much the definition of the sport.
Mhm.
So, how do you build your muscle memory? That's what this is. So, now that they've changed the game, and there's other games out there, all of them, for the most part, don't rely on a single piece of muscle memory. Or in the 2023 rules of the game, it was bullseyes and 2 kill shots. The 2 kill shots are a similar muscle memory, obviously, because it's the same height, even though optically it looks different because it's in concentric rings, and that does play a part in your brain. But theoretically, it's in the same spot on both sides, so it's the same amount of power and velocity being put upward, and then the amount of rotation that you want on the axe. And then that bullseye, you're going to have the most muscle memory because generally it's about eye level or slightly lower than eye level. And it's just one after another. And removing those variables to develop perfect throw muscle memory is the name of the game. Who could do it the best? And then what does it come down to?
And doing it under pressure.
Do it under pressure. What are the things that you've done? I just recently watched a mini doc. I don't watch NASCAR, but I was bored at night and was on the Netflix.
Got a Netflix special going.
Well, they had a docu-series on NASCAR, and I was like, man, it's been like 15 years since I watched any kind of NASCAR. But so these guys are stock car racers, meaning everything is about these cars are supposed to be the exact same. The only difference is the driver. That's the purpose of NASCAR. It's all stock. The driver is the thing that makes the difference. So you've got rules that set the left and right limits of what you can do mechanically, design-wise with that car. So now that all the drivers are getting so dang good at what they do, then they've got full teams spending millions of dollars to find the thing that gets that car to go faster 1/2 a second on a lap. So now in axe throwing, now that you've got a lot of people that are consistently like hitting 90% bullseye rates and over 75% kill shot rates. Now the next part is what's the thing that you can change in order to, instead of having, averaging 1-5 in a 10 throw game or 2 5s to 1-5, that's going to make the difference between a world champion and 4th place at this point, So, that could be, it could be the shoes that Ryan was talking about. It could be the material of the shirt. It could be, so it's interesting to examine all of these things as a part of the throw and the throw itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, the name of this podcast is The Evolution of the Throw. You've got throwers that, start off, and I'm just going to describe so that we can insert some video over this diatribe that I'm about to go into. All right, so usually you've got your toes right there at the 15-foot line. You line it up. Usually you use some sort of aiming mechanism in your brain somehow. the way I start everybody off is I say, you want the axe to be about 90 degrees and you're looking through the hatchet head and putting it on that bullseye. And then they take the step, shift the weight, shake hands with the bullseye. Then you start developing some muscle memory. So I have a lot of customers that say, okay, well, I'm doing that, but how do you really aim? And how do you describe that? How do you aim a dart? I don't know. Your brain's going to work different than mine.
One thing for me is like, if anybody that's familiar with like 2-eye open shooting, when you put the axe in front of you and you're staring at the bullseye, you're going to have two axes. Close that left and right eye until you figure out which one's the true one, and then I have two axes, the left one and the right one, but say
I'm right eye dominant or whatever.
The right one's the one I focus with. So if that's there, if the head's at bullseye now, as long as I let go here, then it should be a bullseye. All right, you're 2 inches above, so just drop it down a little bit, and then
put a little less power on your throw, whatever. Yeah. And then that applies for both the stepping two-handed throw and one-handed throw. Then the way my evolution went was removing the step variable. Now I was still comfortable with the draw back and throw, but get myself as close and accurately to that 12-foot line to begin my throw and throw that way. And a lot of people, obviously, big axe, the discipline of big axe still uses kind of that tenet, because there are very few Canadian flicks with a big axe. So it's usually a stationary one-handed overhand throw or two-handed. There's still two-handed throwers out there that throw big axe very accurately. But removing that step variable, I got pretty accurate, evidently, when I was not under tournament pressure. That would migrate you to the Canadian flick. So that's, getting as close to that 12-foot line, having whatever internal brain aiming mechanism that you have, and the muscle memory of velocity and power that you're putting on the axe in order to hit the bullseyes or kill shots. And then the last portion of that evolution is you go to a tournament, you get your butt kicked, and you say, I have to get my stance more stable. Yeah. So let's try this Canadian flick thing. And then the Canadian flick, which I described earlier, is, plateauing that axe on here. And instead of it being a throw with arm, elbow, and shoulder, it's more wrist, forearm, straight forward, straight back, straight forward.
Yeah, because if you do use like the shoulder, did it move out 12 degrees, 10 degrees, 14 degrees? Like everything's going to be a little variable. How much is from the shoulder? How much is from the elbow?
Right.
Or with the flick, it's kind of like that. Not saying it is, but it's like, say, 3 inches in the back and then send it. You already know, like, because for me, once that axe head comes off my ear, that's when I know to send it. And that's kind of my placing, that I'm still trying to either get the endurance, the strength, or adaptability because of my shoulder. I'm trying to fine tune that into where I can be repeatable. Because there's some, like you've seen it. I've gone up and I'll throw a 40 or a 45, and I'm only 2 months in. But then there's some games where it's like 18. Like, sometimes I'm competing against myself. Sometimes I'm competing against who I'm throwing with.
Yeah. But it's all about the reps. The reps are about the muscle memory. So it's all about building muscle memory. Just like an archer, just like a dart player, just like, a cornholer. Muscle memory, strength memory, the mind-muscle connection, whatever you want to call it. It's how repeatable can you be as a thrower? That's the one that's going to win. The person that has mastered repeatability and doing it under pressure.
Yeah,
that's right. So, of the throws that you've been taught, and we could get into a couple of the, the basic, the ones that you learn at the axe throwing venues. You've got the standard underhand throw, the 1.5, which is basically a 15-foot throw where you turn the axe head backwards and it's a draw, back, and throw. Obviously, that is not a Canadian flick. That's just a standard draw, back, and throw. But do you believe that the Canadian flick eventually will be the right answer for you when it comes to
100%?
Yeah.
So from about 24 feet, I can land a double rotation. I can do the underhand with the blade facing out and the axe coming downward. I can do the 1.5 where the blade's facing me. I've got about, I think, 6 axe throws that I can do now just for the hatchet. But the Canadian flick is the only one for me that I found to be somewhat accurate. Like, for the Canadian flick, I'm more or less always in that center board.
Yeah.
Where with the one-handed and the two-handed, I can be close to the height I want it to be, but it has a lot more drift than what I would want for a competitive sense.
Sure. And we had Aaron Corbin on 2 episodes ago, and he was talking about when he came in for his family's birthday party. I had never met Aaron before. I just knew that they had set up wood planks in their backyard, and they would throw things at it. And they were like, hey, let's do this all official like. And when he came in, his whole family, like, that they were pretty good right out of the box, but they were a step and throw, but they were pretty competitive against each other. And then I was like, hey, let me show you. Well, I was throwing next to them with the Canadian flick, and he was just like, what is that?
What is that?
Yeah.
What are you doing right there?
What are you doing right
Why
there?
didn't you show me that?
And I did. And he picked it up pretty quick. He did recognize that, this takes a different muscle. Yeah. And then when he started getting more and more competitive, started working here and becoming competitive, he was dead set on mastering that Canadian flick, and
he's gotten very good.
Yeah, he has. So, so far for my money, I would say if you're going to bet on a throw to be the most competitive, unless something else comes around, that Canadian flick for competitive axe throwers is probably the one that will win you tournaments or leagues.
Based on ability, because we do have
based on ability,
13-year-old in our league on Tuesdays.
Yes.
And he obviously 13-year-old, so he does it over his head, 2-hand. But the kid is lethal with it.
Yeah.
He is very good.
Yeah. He almost took last week's tournament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like there's weird things. So like for me personally, when I do the 2-hand, once I get that axe up, I like to send my head forward, and then that way my hands always come to my eye level versus I'm trying to dance around the mic.
Yeah.
Versus like, is it here? Is it here? It's like, no, if I send my head forward, I know my head's always in the same spot, not little up, little down. So
yeah,
just something I've kind of used.
Right. Well, I mean, so that's kind of an introduction to the kind of the evolution of the axe throw as most throwers experience it, and it's not everybody. So in the comments you could be like, I never left my 2-handed throw. Like there's a guy named Brandon Elliott that throws out of one of the Carolinas, and he smokes a 2-handed throw. That at least last year.
Yeah, you were telling me about that female professional who kind of throws a little, I'll say weird, but different every time, but she's lethal. So it's what works for you.
Right. But right now I could tell you that I would actually, if anybody is a statistician that wants to, start tallying up how many Canadian flicks are out there competitively versus other types of throws, and I love a good chart, love a good graph. I would love to see what the consensus across the community is. So that'd be pretty neat.
Yeah, I would say just based off what I've seen, it's about 90% of pro throwers that do either the Canadian flick or a very close variation of.
Yeah. I think the one more throw that I think I'll point out is a Sean Daniels. So Sean Daniels is wildly accurate, and he's got a hammer gripped stationary throw, but he starts here, but he brings it next to his head, catches that stability for a moment, and then throws. And So that's kind of like a variation of that modified Canadian, but he's a hammer grip guy. And, instead of, putting it on on the pad of his hand and throwing it. And, I love throwing against Sean because we always have this back and forth battle. And it's a lot of fun. We talk smack. So,
Well, I'm kind of curious, like, since he does come straight back from the front, is that like a shoulder elbow range of motion, or is that like I want to make sure I'm in line with my target versus like just kind of going from here?
I think it's
Just
more
kinda
of an
curious.
aiming mechanism for him. It's just the way that his muscle memory developed, and this is how I aim the axe. And I bet you at the end of a tournament, he's probably got, I bet you he has more stamina than the rest of us because of the way he throws.
Yeah,
Because I bet you you're not wasting or you're not taxing smaller muscle groups. He's using larger muscle groups. Who knows? But nonetheless, every time I see our names come up on the bracket together, I go, oh,
It's gonna be a good match.
this is gonna be a good match. Yeah. So, well, if you like this video and you want to hear more about the different types of throws, leave it in the comments, like, subscribe, and definitely share this video. We can be found on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, all the places you can hear the audio versions. If you want to actually watch these throws, then jump on YouTube, the AxeLifePodcast. And until next time, we'll see you later.